just flush that down the walls. I'm going to put about 2 milliliters in there because then it'll probably be at a decent concentration for GC mass spec. Just transfer that to the vial. That'll do. This is dirty now. And we'll store that. Dump this. I should be able to grab that other flask off the rotovap now. Pull that out and wipe that guy down. Turn off the pump, open it up. Stop the rotation. I'm actually done with this, so I'm going to turn off the water bath as well. And then when I turn off the pump, I want to make sure it's pulling air so that there's not vacuum on one side and it pulls water back in. And then I'll close that. And we can drain the water in there, which now has ether in it. So let's get a mass of this guy. You can see that there's definitely not as thick a layer of white solid on this flask, because it's a larger flask. So if all goes well, we'll actually get some more pure cinnamic acid and some more pure vanillin out of this. Looks like 79.229 grams now. 79.229 grams. And I'm going to grab a couple more vials and we'll transfer that. A couple more labels. And we'll do the same thing with this as we did with the vanillin. Scrape as much as we can out. Make up a GC mass spec sample with the rest. Dissolve it in ethyl acetate. And we can set up a batch file to run those too. See what kind of purity we get. And if I were smart, I would have written on them before I taped them on. Oh well. So this is TCA from the column. I'm going to put a COL there that tells me that this came from the column. And this is TCA from the column in ethyl acetate. You'll give this a lot number, so you'll actually have 2 new lot numbers that come from your original vanillin. And this is a little dirty with the vanillin still, so I'm going to be lazy. I'm just going to wipe it with the paper towel that I used. Let's wipe that off and I'll use it again. And I need a piece of weighing paper. Sorry if you're getting seasick with all the movement. And I want to weigh the one that I'm going to put the solid in. But put the tape on there first. So we'll see what percentage of the material we get back in one or the other fraction. This vial is 6.046 gram, 6.046 grams. And we'll see what we can scrape. Also a nice scrape solid, behaving pretty well. Column chromatography, the silica gel actually absorbs water too. So if your sample was even a little bit wet, once it's run through the silica column, it won't be wet anymore. So these solids are much drier and more powdery than the ones that came from the extraction. Even drying with sodium sulfate isn't perfect. Compounds can still be a little bit wet. So it looks like we got a fair amount of this solid. Unfortunately, it looks like we got more of this solid than we got of the other one, but and it's light and fluffy. Probably about as much as I'm going to get. And again, I'm going to use about 2 pipettefuls. I'm not sure what that is. About 2 pipettefuls of ethyl acetate. I'll just run down the walls. Yeah, maybe 3. Get a good concentration for the GC mass spec. Either my pipette tip is cracked or my bulb has a hole in it. I'm getting a lot of air bubbles. Probably the pipette tip is cracked. That stuff will get cleaned later. These are my 2 things for GC mass spec. And now I just have to get this in there without dumping it all over the bench. Always a little bit of challenge getting solids into these really small vial necks. Which is what the pointy part of the spatula is good for. Let's go away that. See how much solid we were able to transfer. That's plenty for analysis. Doesn't take much for IR or for melting point. Looks like we're at 6.189 grams now. 6.190. 6.190 grams for what we think is mostly transdynamic acid. that came off the column. So off the column we got, right, two pieces. We got some vanillin and we got some tranexamic acid. The tranexamic acid fractions are definitely lighter and fluffier. Looks like more mass too. Looks like almost twice as much of this as that. We know there's a little bit of vanillin in there from fraction 13. Hopefully not too much. So now, ready for running GC mass spec. I'll go get a couple of vials, and since you've already seen the setup for that, there's no reason for me to record it. But I will provide the results of the GC mass spec on those two samples.